The Autonomic Nervous System, Chapter 14. Okay, so the autonomic nervous system is really the visceral motor side. We have the sensory side is somatic and visceral. On the motor side, we have a somatic that goes to all the skeletal muscle, and we have a visceral, and that really is the autonomic nervous system. So it innervates the organs. It is involuntary. It's subconsciously controlled. And so these are the other names for it. It's over here. The autonomic nervous system actually has two divisions: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Right. So what are some of the differences between these motor systems? Well, in the somatic motor system, the effectors are skeletal muscle. In the autonomic nervous system, it is smooth muscle or glands or things like that. There are different pathways that it follows, although they're involved in some of the same nerve paths, but the efferent pathways of the somatic are really a single motor neuron going from the central nervous system to the target. And in the autonomic, there are two neurons. There's a preganglionic and a postganglionic neuron. And the neurotransmitters vary. So that's what I just said. Okay, the somatic neurons are heavily myelinated. The speed of conduction is very quick. In the autonomic nervous system, the preganglionic neuron is lightly myelinated, but it is myelinated. And the ganglionic neuron, the neuron that is the second one in the path, can be unmyelinated or, again, lightly myelinated. So in the somatic, it's all acetylcholine. All the preganglionic and the autonomic are acetylcholine. The postganglionic release either norepinephrine or acetylcholine, depending on what it is. Now, in the somatic nervous system, all of acetylcholine is always excitatory. It causes muscular contraction. In the autonomic, it is excitatory or inhibitory, and it depends really on the type of receptor. So the same neurotransmitter can have two different effects on two different cells, depending on the receptor to that cell. So this is an important picture. This actually gives you the idea of it. So really, when you look at what comes from the central nervous system, the cell bodies, all four motor neurons are very much alike. When you start to look in the periphery, the axons, the somatic, heavily myelinated, releases ACH, acetylcholine, and is stimulatory. In the sympathetics, lightly myelinated, release acetylcholine, but they do it at a ganglion. And so there's a second motor neuron leaving the ganglion, or at the ganglion. So at the ganglion, in most of them, we have an unmyelinated postganglionic axon that releases norepinephrine. In the case of the adrenal gland, the adrenal medulla, which is neurological in origin, they basically are neurons that don't have any axons. What happens is the acetylcholine stimulates the release of basically the same neurotransmitters as epinephrine, norepinephrine, but it does it into the bloodstream, so it really acts as a hormone. So it becomes a more systemic sort of thing. But it's the same process. In the parasympathetics, the preganglionic is long, and actually the preganglionic in the sympathetic is short, but the parasympathetic is long, releases acetylcholine. The postganglionic is short, unmyelinated, and releases acetylcholine. The acetylcholine or the norepinephrine will have a stimulatory or an inhibitory effect. Depends on the receptor and the effector organ that has the receptors on it. So almost all of your organs have sympathetic stimulation and parasympathetic stimulation. And how that organ is functioning really depends on the balance between the two. Sometimes sympathetic predominates, sometimes parasympathetic predominates. So the parasympathetic is rest and digest. So this is conserving energy, maintenance. It's all about maintaining the organism. So rest and digest. So blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rates all go down. GI activity goes up. You constrict your pupils. You don't have as much, when you're parasympathetic, you don't have near as much peripheral vision. Lenses naturally accommodate for close vision. This is why after a big meal you kind of like to sit and read, or you just lay around. You become life support for your digestive system, basically. In the sympathetics, it's fight and flight. So this prepares you to run away or get into a fight. So you need more ATP, which means you need more oxygen flow. So you need more blood pressure, therefore. So heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. You don't waste any blood going to unnecessary things like your digestive system, for that matter, to your skin. Your bronchioles dilate, so you get more oxygen. Your liver starts releasing glucose through either gluconeogenesis or glycogenolysis. Either way, blood sugars go up so that you can actually make more ATP. All of it is about making more ATP. So I already said this, the sympathetics, the fibers start in the thoracolumbar region. They have short preganglionic, long postganglionic, and the ganglion are found right beside the spinal cord. They're paraspinal. The parasympathetic, really, there's the 4 cranial nerves that I talked about as being parasympathetic, and the sacral nerves do it. So it's craniosacral. They have long preganglionic going all the way out to the organ, and then a short postganglionic. So the ganglion are actually right at the target organ. So so the vagus nerve leaves the cranium, leaves the brain, and a branch of it goes all the way to the heart. And it synapses with a ganglion right on the surface of the heart that then innervates some of the nodes in the heart. So long and short. Looks like this. Sympathetic in green, parasympathetic in purple. So this cranial nerve here is the vagus nerve, and it does a lot of things. Bladder, genitals, or sacral. You'll notice that there are no parasympathetic or no sympathetics coming from the cervical region or much of the lumbar region or the sacral region. It all comes out of the thorax and the upper part of the lumbar, the upper couple in the lumbars. You probably all have heard of craniosacral therapy. One of the ideas behind craniosacral therapy is most of us have too much sympathetic activity. Stress causes sympathetic activity, and most of us are stressed, especially post-traumatic stress and things like that. And the idea behind craniosacral therapy is to stimulate the parasympathetics to try and balance out the sympathetics. And so by stimulating those areas, you will presumably increase parasympathetic activity and offset the what's called sympathetic atonia. And people will be more relaxed and more balanced. So I've already said when we talked about the cranial nerves that the parasympathetics start in cranial nerve 3, 7, 9, and 10. The sacral are 2, 3, and 4. And this is a kind of a map of where it goes. The sympathetic, thoraco and topolumbar, the preganglionic start in T1 down to L2. So the sympathetic is actually in the neurons start in the lateral horns of the spinal cord. So it starts in the gray matter just to the lateral. Not there's like a little bump in it. So it's not that important, but that's where it goes. Right. So the preganglionic then leave the spinal cord and they enter the sympathetic trunk, so which is the paravertebral ganglion. So it ends up coming out and synapsing in here. Some of them go down, some of them go up, etc. Okay, so so you'll notice that there are ganglion even up in the cervical region, although the preganglionic don't start in the cervical region, they start in the thoracic region. That doesn't mean that they're not cervical ganglion. The nerves that go up into the cervical ganglion start in the thoracic. They're called white rami communicants because they are myelinated and they communicate with the ganglion. Now, you will also notice that some of these bundle together and form nerves that extend out into either to ganglion or directly out into organs. We call any bundle of these sympathetic nerves the splanchnic nerves. So there's a greater and lesser splanchnic nerve that end up in the celiac ganglion, which is commonly known as the solar plexus. There's a superior mesenteric ganglion. There's an inferior mesenteric ganglion. So there's really a ganglion that matches up with each major artery that leaves the aorta. These ones here are the renal ganglion. So an important thing is, what is a splanchnic nerve? And it is a collection of axons of the sympathetic. So they're not peripheral nerves. They're not quite the same, but they're considered nerves nonetheless. So the ganglion have, so there's 3 cervical, 11 thoracic, 4 lumbar, 4 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. Again, these are the ganglion, not the origins of these. And when we look at the anatomy of it, that you'll see that a nerve root comes out. There's a ventral nerve root, which is motor. There's a dorsal nerve root, which is sensory. It branches back here. So this is the spinal nerve here and here, and then it branches into rami. There's the dorsal rami. There's the ventral rami. You will see that there are these bulbs in this sympathetic trunk. The paravertebral ganglion are all here. So what happens here is the preganglionic neuron comes out here, right, and passes through the white ramus communicans. It then synapses and then goes through the gray ramus communicans, gray being non-myelinated. So what happens when it enters the ganglion? The preganglionic can synapse with the ganglion at that level, or with a neuron in the at that ganglion, or it can go up or it can go down the sympathetic tract to go to another level, or it can pass right through and emerge without synapsing. So basically it's this. Preganglionic is this, and it's short. White ramus communicans, synapse. Postganglionic goes this way through the gray ramus communicans and extends along the nerve. And it would be the ventral ramus of the nerve. It can also go up and do it. So this white, that gray, or it can go down. And so it would be basically out this way through this white and down and out that gray. Or it can pass right through and go out to another ganglion. So the postganglionic go through the gray rami communicans. They innervate sweat glands, erector pili, and smooth muscle in all the blood vessels. So these ones go everywhere in your body. Right. So the upper ones go to your head, right? Your salivary glands, etc. Right? Heart and all of that. Please don't bother to memorize all of this stuff. Just kind of get an understanding of where these things end up going. Right? So there's the splanchnic nerves. So the ganglion, celiac, superior, and inferior mesenteric are the really important ones. Okay, and these serve stomach, intestines, liver, spleen, and kidneys. So those like the abdominal organs. So from the low part, you end up splanchnic nerves, lumbar and sacral splanchnic nerves, and they go to your large intestine, your rectum, bladder, reproductive organs. Okay, some go right to the adrenal medulla. right? And so the renal medulla just secretes norepinephrine and epinephrine as a hormone. It secretes it into the blood. I'm not so worried about visceral reflexes, but it's the same idea as the somatic reflexes. The only difference is the extra neuron, and that's the difference between the somatic and visceral anyways. So it ends up like this. So a receptor, sensory neuron, synapse to a motor neuron, preganglionic, synapse to the postganglionic neuron that goes to the effector, makes the response happen. Referred pain will be talked about in pathology, I assume, but basically the issue here is that visceral pain travels on the same pathways as somatic pain, but we don't perceive visceral pain as being visceral. We perceive it as being somatic in origin, so that we end up with these funny pain patterns, so that your liver actually ends up causing pain in the right shoulder. Your heart is in the left chest, so the liver is also right over the liver. Your appendix becomes much larger than the appendix. Your ureters, which are located up here, actually cause pain down here, more in kind of the fronts of thigh. So there is those factors. When it's appropriate for different pathologies, you will discuss where the referred pain patterns are for it. It's very interesting. Right shoulder itself is gallbladder. So the neurotransmitters. So anything that releases acetylcholine is a cholinergic fiber. So that's all the preganglionic axons, all the parasympathetic postganglionic axons, and all of the somatic motor ganglions, or somatic motor neurons. The they release epinephrine. Adrenaline is where this word comes from. Epinephros, adrenal, same thing. So it's the sympathetic postganglionic axons, right, with a couple of exceptions. Same chart. So you need receptors. You need the cholinergic receptors for acetylcholine. You need the, and I can't have trouble pronouncing it, but adrenergic. There should be an O in it. I think that's my problem. So of the acetylcholine types, there's two types. There's the nicotinic that respond to nicotine and will mimic the effect, and the other is muscarinic, which responds to magic mushrooms and mimics the effect. So when you think about smoking, then actually makes you parasympathetic. It calms you down because it affects the parasympathetics. So it affects skeletal muscles, right? So all the ganglionic neurons, so all of the in the ganglion, so all of the postganglionic neurons have receptors in the ganglion, right? The hormone-producing cells of the adrenal medulla, so right, so it's stimulatory. The muscarinic are all the effector cells stimulated by the postganglionic fibers, so inhibitory or excitatory. I don't really care about the subtypes of these. It really depends on the target organ. Okay, the drugs you will take in pharmacology, but realize that they have effects on these neurotransmitters and things. So what happens here is the autonomic division, or sympathetic and parasympathetic, both do the same organs, right? And they tend to be antagonistic. So sympathetic tends to turn things up, parasympathetic tends to turn things down, except the opposite in the digestive system. We tend to have sympathetic tone at rest in your blood pressure. So we tend to have some vasoconstriction most of the time, so that when we turn down the sympathetics and turn up the parasympathetics, we just reflexly get vasodilation. So it's because the sympathetic fires more rapidly. And so we can raise blood pressure very effectively this way. Parasympathetics slows the heart, normal activity in digestive urinary. So sometimes they work together. Sexual arousal is a big thing. You need to be parasympathetic to get aroused. So erections or female arousal is a parasympathetic response. That's why it's very difficult to get Mr. Happy to work when you're stressed. But you need sympathetic for orgasm. So again, sympathetics, thermoregulation responses to heat, renin from the kidneys, which increases blood pressure, which the sympathetics already do, increase metabolic rate of cells, mobilize more glucose, mobilize fat, that kind of thing. Parasympathetic tends to be short-lived and local. Sympathetics tend to be long-lasting and body-wide. If you're stressed, you really need to stay stressed until things are gone, until the threat's over. Okay, and it's all got to do with removal of epinephrine and norepinephrine versus acetylcholine. Acetylcholine gets removed quickly. Epinephrine and norepinephrine stay there until the liver takes them away, so that takes some time. So it's all controlled by the hypothalamus, and then there's some cerebral cortex and spinal cord things, but mostly it's hypothalamus. Okay, and I'm not going to worry too much, because when we talk about each of these things, and when we talk about the heart, we're going to talk about hypothalamus control. When we talk about water balance, we're going to talk about hypothalamic control. We've already talked about endocrine control by the hypothalamus, the releasing and inhibiting hormones, those sorts of things. And then the rest of this is developmental aspects, and that is the autonomic nervous system.